Hello everyone and welcome back to Key's PWI Survival Guide. My name's Kiana and today we're going to be talking about mental health with Professor Betts. If y'all remember, Professor Betts was one of my first guests in my survival guide. She is one of the co-chairs and co-directors of the Race and Ethnic Studies minor, and she's also a social worker. So she was the perfect person to discuss this topic with. Mental health being something that can be a stigma in BIPOC communities, but also tips and ideas and thoughts about things that they should be thinking about once they come into school and the challenges and stressors that they could be faced with. Here is my conference talk discussion about mental health with Professor Betts. And I will also come back and kind of discuss a couple of the resources that we have here on campus, such as CAPS, but also the importance of keeping a connection with a mental health provider or therapist that you already have at home. So let's get right into it.
Yay! All right. Okay. So my name is Shayla Betts. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and here at Longwood, I am the assistant professor of social work, and I am the founding co-director of the Race and Ethnic Studies minor.
So for professors and faculty, how can their cultural understanding help their minoritized students in the classroom?
Yeah, so I think it's important when we think about mental health. First, we need to talk about the different terminology that we're using, right? Some people will say mental wellness, some people refer to mental health, and others will talk about mental illness. Mental health is something that we all have, just like we all have a physical health. We all have mental functioning mental health, whether it is on that spectrum from healthy to unhealthy to somewhere in between. So I think that's important when we talk about mental health. Everybody has mental health. When we talk about mental wellness, that in some ways can be referred to as like how we are caring for our mental health. And then mental illness is more focusing on the different disorders like the depression, the anxiety, the ADHD, things like that. So when we're thinking about mental health, especially regarding students of color, it's important to note that we're looking at the person as the whole person. And so what we've seen through a lot of research is that people of color have different experiences in our current society than the dominant race or white people. And so when we're thinking about mental health, there are a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, there are systemic injustices, there's racism, there's oppressions that students of color experience that white students don't always experience. We also have to be mindful that in research and when we look at the history of the DSM and how we've studied it, populations of color are not always included in the testing, assessment, diagnosis process. So while we have these standards, they haven't always been inclusive. So we need to be mindful of the very diverse and various experiences that anybody may have, regardless of their racial identity, but keeping in mind that for many students with racial differences, their experience might have some other things that they're carrying as well. So we want to be mindful of what is this person, who is this person, what are they capable of, how are they functioning, and how do their multiple identities impact that?
Okay, so using that vocabulary of mental illness, is there, I'm sure there's research about how different mental illnesses show up differently in communities of color. In your, I guess, own background, have you seen, or what are some, not to use the word red flags, but flagging things that students might present in classroom that you've noticed that kind of point to those concerns, I guess?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that mental illness shows up differently in different people and is not something that you can identify just visually looking at the person. So behaviors that I pay attention to as I'm starting to get to know the student, if I see a change in their behaviors, like if I have a student who is typically really talkative, very engaged, has really strong coursework, and then as the semester goes on, they are becoming more withdrawn. Maybe they're missing classes, maybe they're not participating as much. Maybe their assignments are late or missing. I'm starting to wonder, okay, what's going on? Is it typical semester stresses or is there something a little bit more there? And that, honestly, it goes for any student. So I know we're focusing on students of color, but I don't want to say that and make it seem like, white students will go through this too. Well, all students can. So I'm looking at behavioral changes throughout the semester. Sometimes different mental illnesses may express in withdrawn behavior. Maybe it's a little bit more aggressive behavior. Maybe it's isolating. Maybe it's lack of concentration. So there are a lot of different things that I might look for and consider the student's mental health as a possible predictor or explanation of what's going on.
That also kind of answers the question about just overall for faculty, the things that faculty should be mindful of. Since we're kind of talking also about majority students, what are ways that majority students can be allies to their peers of color, but also peers of color being allies to our majority students?
Yeah. I think part of it is something that I'm still working on, trying to be mindful of how to phrase it. I'm very intentional about my vocabulary. So I really don't like saying like students of color and then white students, because that kind of emphasizes that othering, right? We have the norm or the white students, and then we have the other students, the students of color. And so we have to be mindful of our language and how we're separating them, because in some ways we're comparing them, but at the same time we're all just people of different races. So I think that's one thing to be mindful of. I think also if I were talking to a white student and how would you interact with other students, just be mindful that experiences are different, that some of us have privileges that others don't, and whether or not it feels like you have privilege or earned benefit. I hear a lot of people saying, well, I don't feel like I have privileges. And that may be true, right? I have privileges that I don't typically think about, like my physical ability or my nationality or my religion. Those are all privileges. I don't feel privileged, but I know I'm not oppressed because of it. So it's not to say about, well, I don't feel like I'm special. It's like, okay, well, you're not struggling in this area due to a social identity. So I think being mindful of those differences, being respectful of those differences, being able to ask questions, but also being mindful of who you're asking and how you're asking, and recognize that the onus is on you to educate yourself, and that you can't always depend on a person of whatever identity to explain it for you, because that also places an extra burden on them, especially if that's not a role that they want to fill in that moment. So just being mindful of how we engage with different people, and be mindful of what others are carrying. I mean, you all are all students, and so you know what it's like to be, at the end of the semester and burnout and stress, and now pile on all these different discriminations and oppressions that we handle on a day-to-day basis. It adds up.
Absolutely. And so for prospective students
Yes.
that might come from a background that they might not have recognized certain mental health needs or those things, what are your tips for them kind of transitioning into college? Because obviously it's a big change from high school to a 4-year campus away from home and kind of that stable life. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Transitioning to college is a huge transition, and it can bring up a lot of new experiences, challenging experiences. I say engage in that self-awareness. If something feels different, feels wrong, feels off, feels challenging, lean into it, explore it, see what it is. Try to name it if you can. Naming it often is the first way to take ownership of it and say, okay, well, now that I know what's going on, how can I seek supports? It can be very overwhelming to come to college and to say, oh, you just need to get out and meet people. Not everybody's an outgoing person, but at least get to know your RA or, some of your professors. Just have a meaningful conversation with at least one or two of your professors. Go to their office hours. Be aware of different services on campus like CAPS and OMA and things like that. So slowly try to encourage yourself to build some sort of social support so that if and when things get challenging, you have somebody on campus that you can go to and potentially confide in, and then hopefully you also have social supports in your personal life outside of campus. So I would say use your social supports. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Name your experience. Know that you are not by any means alone in this. I know when I first went to college, and I'm not a first generation student, it was expected for me to always go to college, get my graduate degree. It's kind of like, where are you going? What are you doing? Compared to, are you going? And I hated my first year of college. I felt very isolated. I was very withdrawn. I just went to classes. I went to work. I was by myself. I hated it. And the difference between my freshman year and my sophomore year is my sophomore year, I really focused on getting out, trying to meet people, socializing more, and my experience did a complete 180, and I loved the final 3 years. So I would say, based on your comfort level, get out, meet people, go to different events, talk to people, right? Even if you're like in the cafeteria, talk to the staff, like they're amazing, you know? So wherever you can find just like a friendly smile or something like that, take advantage of it.
I know for me, Jonathan Page and Oma, definitely, I'm like, Jonathan, I need to come see you now. And kind of having that person on campus that you can talk to is always,
yes,
it saves your life for real.
It does.
But
look, I'll just say you don't have to be my student to come to my office. I am in Hall 225. Anybody who walks through that door is at home. Okay, come see me. I'm the friendly face if you need me to be.
That's perfect. You answered your question about your background.
Yeah.
And kind of mixing the mental and the physical side of health.
Yeah.
How can we bridge, in your personal opinion, like how do we bridge, like you said, because we have a mental health and a physical health, but a lot of time we focus on the physical.
Right.
So how do we bridge those two?
My first thought is they are already bridged. It's us that needs to make that connection. Our mind is such a powerful thing. And going back to one of the previous questions, our mental health signals that we are struggling can come up through physical means. So not sleeping enough, sleeping too much, eating too much, not eating at all, getting sick. If students are stressed and they start not feeling well, I'm thinking, what is your self-care, right? How are you caring for self? Because our bodies will tell us when we need a break. Our bodies will tell us, our mind will tell us, our mind will tell us through our body. So being mindful of that. Did I fully answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. Because one of the things I kind of wanted to do at the end of my internship is kind of create a model. And one of the things I was wanted to think about was advocating for the self and what advocating for the self means in a holistic kind of idea. So that perfectly.
Definitely. I would encourage you to look into self-care, because self-care, we talk about it and it's kind of an umbrella term, but there are different dimensions of self-care. Physical self-care is just one of that, right? So when we're thinking about our whole selves, physical self-care is like the exercising, taking your vitamins, eating well, sleeping well, going to your doctor for regular checkups. But then there's also social self-care, there's educational professional self-care, there's spiritual self-care, mental emotional self-care. Like there's a lot of different types of self-care and a lot of activities to do within each dimension of self-care. So it's all connected, and we have to be intentional about understanding that bridge and acknowledging that bridge.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. So, as I mentioned in the intro, and as well as Professor Betts mentioned, is CAPS. And so CAPS stands for Counseling and Psychological Services, and it is located in our Health and Fitness Center on the upper level. And so what CAPS offers is individual and group counseling, crisis outreach. They can also test students for things like ADHD and other accessible needs and things like that. But CAPS is a resource that I think has had some controversy in the last couple of years about how effective it is, how inclusive and diverse it is. And that's one of the things I wanted to discuss was how important it is to have a connection with a therapist, either at home or in the area that students feel connected to. Because I know for me personally, I call my therapist my lady, and I say all the time, I'm about to call my lady. I'm about to make an appointment with my lady. And, having that connection or that rapport with someone that you're already seeing is super important. And especially in college, you want to keep that connection. And so if you have someone that you are already seeing at home, don't let that connection or relationship fall short, because you might need to talk to someone outside of your situation. And CAPS might not necessarily give you what you need, but it is absolutely a resource that is available to all students for free. And again, it is in our health center, our health fitness center. And so you can contact CAPS at 434-395-2409. And you can also email them at longwoodcaps@longwood.edu. they will reach out. If you reach out to someone in CAPS, you all can set up a appointment that works around your class schedule. So you can meet them once, you can meet them every week, you can meet them every month, whatever is up to the student's needs. And that is such an important thing, though, to have that kind of resource on campus. But at the same time, again, it is so necessary, especially for BIPOC students, to have someone that they feel like they can talk to about their mental health, I think, journey, but also how well they're keeping up with their mental health. But for CAPS, I also think it's very important that CAPS is in our health and fitness center, because I never really thought about what Professor Betts said about how our mental health and our physical health are already interconnected. And it is us that have to remember that those things are already a part of us and a combination, but we shouldn't separate them. So, health and fitness is such a kind of a hand-in-hand thing. And so I wanted to make sure that I discussed CAPS and reminding students, don't feel bad that you're not using CAPS. Use the resources that you have at home that make you feel like your needs are met. And that's really all I have for this episode. This is actually the last official episode for the survival guide. And so next episode, I'll actually be uploading the breakdown of my peer or my internship model. So I'm very excited to show you all of that. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.